All right. We'll go ahead and get started. And thank you guys for coming. My name is Dawn Fackler. I'm with the Overabundance of Light. I am a grief coach, a hospice nurse, a legal nurse consultant, single mom, mom to a fur baby who's very rotten. And I do have Amanda Johnson joining us today. Amanda, if you don't mind, I'll let you introduce yourself and your background.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Amanda Johnson. I am the CEO of Saved by Story, which is a writing and publishing house. I have been helping messengers tell their stories on pages and stages for the last almost 20 years. And part of that work has been helping them to transmute the pain and often the grief from their backstories into new stories.
And I know we talked about before, you have your own history of background of grief and how you've worked through it.
Mhm.
And helping others work through it has helped you work through it.
Oh, yes.
um, let's start with the caregiving, being a caregiver, and
Oh, yeah.
how that was.
Well, if anyone's caregiving that, no, just kidding.
Yes.
So my grandmother was my absolute favorite human when I was a small child. I mean, I think I spent more time with her than anybody else. And then I had the opportunity to live with her while I was going to school because she was close to the college I went to. And so it was just a deep, deep bond. So by the time she was starting to decline, physically, visually, she had what was in with macular degeneration. Um, Caregivers will appreciate the story of the moment when she told me that it had been about a year that she had been driving between like 100 and plus miles one way. And she told me that she had all of the rate all of the lines on either side of the car were raised. I was like, this has been happening for a year and you didn't tell anyone.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
she was she was a fiercely independent woman, especially probably always, but especially after my grandpa died. She just kind of pulled herself together and started to do a whole bunch of things that she didn't have the opportunity to do while he was here, and she was busy as a wife and a mom and a housekeeper. She was like all about keeping her house. So it was hard. The caregiving was hard. It wasn't a. I had spent some time with her, surgeries, illnesses, those sorts of things. I would go over there for a week or spend summer vacation or something with her to help her out. So we had that relationship of me taking care. So fortunately, I had that. I didn't have to transition from just being this person in her life to then being a caregiver. So that was a little bit easier. Uh, and the hard part really was about a year. It was about a year after I'd started my business. Um, I had just finished a book called um, Caregiving for Baby Boomers, I think is the name of it. It's like a resource guide. And, I'd read through it and it wasn't even a thought in my mind, but there was this one chapter that I just thought was so amazing. And it was about the grief, and I can't remember the term for it, but the grief that happens while they're still here.
And
Because
me and you talked about when they have Alzheimer's, you lose them twice.
yes, and dementia, and they're just, I mean, Alzheimer's and dementia for sure, but even, for someone who is so active and so independent, even before the mental stuff started to get her, it was hard that losing that physical independence. And all of the things that I used to love to do with her, right? Like our world got smaller. And so I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to read that before this all started to happen because I at least was aware of what was taking place, and it helped me to move through that journey a little bit easier. I wish that it had occurred to me then to talk to my little guy about it because she was also his favorite person in the whole world. He grew up with her around all the time. And so when she really started to change because of the dementia, just short and snippy and even abusive at times, verbally, emotionally, that was hard. That was really hard on him because he, was like waking up one day and your favorite person is gone and acting like someone that you don't recognize. So I wish I'd been able to try to have that conversation with him. I guess it didn't occur to me, but
I don't think that occurs to a lot of people. Children, I don't think we give them credit for the emotional intellect that they actually do have. And I sometimes think that they actually look at the world so much simpler than we do. And it makes sense if you think about it and take a step back and go, as a kid, this is, oh, well, it's either this or this. Like there is no gray.
yeah. Yeah, it was hard on him though, because I did notice, and it's something that I've shared with some of my friends who still have littles at home and are taking care of their elders is just trying to keep that conversation going. I mean, we did things like I would tell him, because he still wanted to hang out with her. So like how did we talked about what did he do with his energy before he walked into her room and those sorts of things. But I wish I'd had the language of grief for him that this is just like we're gonna lose her a little bit at a time and it's okay to be sad and even angry about it because it's hard. So yeah, that was a whole a long grief journey. I want to say that was probably 6 or 7 years that we were with her walking alongside just the steady decline.
That is a long time.
Hmm.
And I'm glad you brought up your son because, like I said, there's a lot of times families they try to protect their kids from the loss.
Yeah.
And they always ask me, what am I supposed to do? And I always, even with any family member, you tell them where everything's at. This is what's happening. You tell them what's happening and you let them make the choice after that.
Yeah.
My daughter, I actually have, because of being a nurse and the work that I've been in, I've never sugarcoated any of that to her. And it was always, okay, this is what it is. So and so has died. We do have a funeral. And I let her, even at the age of 7, have the choice. Do you want to go to grandma's funeral or do you want to stay home?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was a big
they
deal.
feel like they have control.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. More agency. And there was a time kind of toward the end of the time that we were there with her where it was so hard for him that he just couldn't, he would do dinners or meals with us, but he wouldn't spend any of that extra time that he used to. And ooh, she did not like that. But again, it was, him taking care of himself. And I totally understood that. And, you know, I think because I had some of the tools and I was able to talk to some of my friends, lots of my clients are 10, 20, 30 years older than me. And so they've been there and done that, right? And so I had kind of a nice safe space to unload and talk about the crazy things that happens when you're taking care of someone with dementia. Um, because I mean, some of it is just pure comedy,
You have to
but
laugh or you'll cry.
you have to. It's like developing gallows humor and also understanding like the tough like the toll that it takes, right, on all the things. And she had the ability to have caregivers come in, which was great, or else I don't know what would have happened to my business. But that was crazy. Like she had I mean, it was just a wild journey. And so, I had the opportunity and the skills to kind of work through that. But he had one opportunity. We had moved away, and so he had an opportunity to go hang out with her. Um, that must have been 6 months before she passed, and he wrote about it in the book that we wrote together. And he kind of knew that was going to be the last time because we were so far away, and so they had a very sweet final connection, which was so I'm so grateful for that. But he didn't. He it was like he could let go of her being here, but he still had all that residual, because she wasn't nice when we told her we were going to leave. She got kind of mean. And so, yeah, so he had the opportunity actually to get a lot of freedom by writing about it. He wrote about it, in our book. And I remember him sending me a very funny text that I'll spare you the expletives, but he basically said, you and your healing through writing stuff, like this is real. Like I think I just got to forgiveness with her through the writing process. So it's pretty
Oh,
amazing. Yeah. Yeah, it was really special. He got to see looking back at the story, had him remember everything, not just the hard stuff, but also all of the really sweet stuff. And so he just got a truer picture of who she was to him. And it was like, I get it. Hero and villain. I can hold both of those in my memory with her. So yeah, very sweet.
that is sweet. So, how did you work through your grief?
With the caregiving,
Yes.
um, like I said, there was some writing, plenty of writing, more journal type with that, but also I think it was the community that I had, just the storytelling itself, not holding things in my heart, so to speak, that shouldn't have stayed there, right? Just being able to say, like, can you believe, and have someone meet me with compassion, especially the ones who had been on the journey before, just be like, oh yeah, let me tell you a story. And just that empathy and being seen, it really did give me a lot of freedom and ability to work through all of that tough material. And then I actually had the opportunity to the day for so many reasons, for so many reasons, I didn't end up getting to her memorial service. We were far away and family stuff and all the stuff. And as it turned out, it was the same day that I was speaking at I think it was called the Superwoman Summit. And so part of what I was talking about was, what we learned from the women in our lives about what it means to be a woman. And so that was, working on that presentation, being able to honor her that way. That was also probably another way that I kind of wrapped that up.
This is sweet. I love hearing everybody's journey and how they do it because everybody's so different.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
I
definitely.
still work through I mean, especially losing my dad because it was so sudden and quick.
Yeah,
And most of the time, that's why I tell people I'm okay. Like the big holidays don't trigger me. It's if I've done something on my house, like a remodel, and I've done it myself, and then I'll step back and think about it and like, oh, dad would be proud because he taught me how to do that.
yeah,
Those are the things that will trigger me.
yeah.
Um, but I don't think I've worked through mine quite like you have yours yet.
Well, it's been a long time, and yeah, I mean, I think it's just different, I think it lands different when it's a sudden thing and you don't have the ability to know what's happening and say a bunch of the things that you wish you'd said. I think I don't think pros and cons is the way that I want to say it, but that, as far as the sudden versus the kind of belabored.
And there's good to both because I have discussed that with a lot of my hospice families. I said, I had my grandma and my grandpa both were on hospice.
Mhm.
And so we knew it was coming. But my dad, I didn't. We didn't know it was coming. So it's like like I said, I didn't get to say a lot of the things that I think of now that I wish I had said to him, but he didn't suffer.
Yeah.
And with the long death, I feel like is what I'm going to call it. With a
Mhm.
longer death, it's you get to say everything, but you have your good and your bad. He didn't
Mhm.
suffer, but I didn't say anything. I got to say everything, but I had to watch him suffer to the very end,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is my big thing on hospice. I Everybody looks at me and they're like, "How do you do it?" And I'm like, "Because I've seen a death without hospice, and then I've seen a death with hospice, and there's a huge, huge difference for everybody involved."
Yeah. That's what I've heard. I didn't exactly have the hospice experience with her. There was someone else with her during that time, but um yeah, it was, the importance of having people around who have walked the journey before, whether that's as professionals or just friends who were caregivers. It's huge because you end up, thinking things that you're like, oh my gosh, if anyone heard me think that, they would think I'm such a horrible human. It's like, no, you're a tired, burnout human who's a mom, a business owner, and you're just at the end, like, ask for help, like, oh, calling in for my angels to show up and relieve me from duty a little bit.
That's what we laugh at if we're all ever more than one hospice nurses together in an office, there things get said that you could not say anywhere
I
else.
believe it. I believe it.
100%. It's
Yeah.
we are our own little group. But it's true, and that's the one thing I wanna get at. Like, for me, it's I color and I think, and
Mhm.
my love language is service, and that's how I get through my grief and through my loss.
Mhm.
And, like, for you, it's writing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I
And it
just let everybody know that it doesn't matter how you do it.
Mhm. Yeah. And the
Everything's okay.
storytelling, my dad probably it, s- that year, I think it was earlier that year, my dad passed very suddenly. He hadn't been well for a long time, but no one expected him to have a heart attack. We thought it was going to be like my grandma, like a slower decline, and then he was just gone. Um, and I had unresolved stuff with him. We had kind of parted on not great terms. I had done my own work to get to a place of um, understanding and as much peace as can happen on this in this dimension um, when someone else isn't, part of that conversation. But I remember the were we going to do a funeral? Were we going to do, arriving? And I've never been like that was kind of my first brush with being in the middle of watching what happens to a family in that process. And I felt like I was kind of distanced from it because I'd already grieved him a lot, our relationship. Not his presence on the planet though. That was a whole different thing. That was like a part of my identity. That was a very strange experience. But um it was so special because I remember just everyone who knew him who could showed up the day after. And we just sat around and told stories for, oh, I don't know, 3, 4 hours, had food out. And um it was such a healing experience, because even, the people that he played on the golf course with, the people that took care of him physically, like all these different people, we didn't exactly get to interact with each other a lot. So it was really fun to see how he was the same guy everywhere, like the stories that would come up and the way that he would do those certain things. Um, and people who hadn't spent a lot of time with each other looking at each other and going, oh, yeah, me too, Um, and I think it accelerated everybody's experience with the loss in a good way, really anchoring more into the good memories than some of the harder ones.
I'm glad you brought that because a lot of people are so scared after a death to bring up the person who died in fear of hurting someone. But I think, like you said, it can be such a healing experience because they touch someone else's heart.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, the understanding too that they were, in some ways are the same person everywhere, but it means something different to everybody. Um, Depending on the relationship and when they showed up. And so, I had all of uh, my unresolved stuff with him. But my two younger sisters and my brother had great relationships with him. And so that was another, kind of delicate, like, um, how do I stay truthful to myself and my experience and honor that? And also do the exact same thing for them because they had, precious relationships that need to be respected. And I loved hearing all of their stories, help to balance it all out.
And it's like you said, they're the same person, but yet everyone's perspective of someone is different.
Yeah.
And we got the same thing with my dad at his memorial. It was people he went to church with. And I'm like, me and my brother had never met these people, and they were talking about him. And then his best friend from high school, we had met him, and his stories were definitely way different
Yeah.
than his church family. But it was still the fun person that you knew. They
Yeah.
were just
Yeah. Yeah.
teenager versus adult.
Well, and the span of age was like 16 years between the oldest and the youngest. So I used to joke all the time with my sisters when they were in their teens, because they'd ask me for advice and I'd be like, those two people are not the people who raised me. So I don't know what to tell you. Everything was so different. So to that point, such different stories even inside the family.
So, how do you help your clients bring out their grief and their loss and their stories?
Um, I think it's a matter of, you know, recognizing that it might be a thing in the story. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not so obvious. Speaking of my dad, my youngest sister wrote a book called Alchemy of the Beast, and it's magical realism, which means it's the foundation of it is real life. The character loses her dad, goes away for a week, and has a magically restorative time, like so many different ways of processing grief, meditation, nature, adventure, all of these sorts of things that kind of brought her back from, I mean, brought her back. She kind of felt like she went with him a little bit. They were so tight at the hip. And so she wrote this book, and the first thing is always, if there's any element of that in the story, grief or actually anything else, it's really important that people give themselves permission to write as if no one is going to read it. Um, because we edit ourselves because there are things that we should or shouldn't say in the family system or the culture or whatever. And I really believe that if we keep those things inside of us, they harm us across time. They fester and turn into something they didn't need to. And so, the first draft, I told her, just, I know you're gonna make it about this character, and I know that you're gonna add all of these different dimensions, but write it true first. And so, some of the flashbacks and things that you see in her novel are some of that really raw material that she decided to leave in there because it was just so true to the character that she left it. And so by the first draft, you know, um, she was feeling much, much better as far as it, releasing the story out from inside of her. And so always write it for yourself first. And the other thing too is that I worked with someone who had lost their husband to suicide, and so that was a different, again, one of those sudden and so complicated, right? The emotions that come up, um, grief, but betrayal and wondering what you could have done if you, I mean, all of those things, right? So I remember sitting beside her at the retreat as she was starting to write and just watching the tears just pour. I mean, the her laptop and the table were just soaked. And, are you okay? Do you need to, like, can we take a deep breath? Can we take a walk? Can we, and she was like, no, this is the right thing. Like, just to let it go back through the memory, write it raw, remember how it felt, and let it begin to process out of the body. Um, all of the different emotions. And then, there was a recent one. I think you're gonna have her on your podcast here soon too.
I'm
So
actually having both.
oh,
Both
good,
the ones you sent to me
good,
will
good.
be later, yes.
Um, Such good stories, and also what I love about these stories is that you can see how they took everything that they had experienced before and and brought it as a superpower through the process, you know? Um, and so uh, with this one individual, you know, writing about um, losing a version of her daughter, a dream that she'd had, you know, what life would look like. Um, I mean, do parents really sit around and think? I don't know, because I don't think I did this with my own kid, but there were certain things that came up when as he was growing that I was like, oh, look, I was really attached to that. I didn't even articulate it, you know? And those were small things, not them losing cognitive function or emotional development, or, you know, being able to continue moving through the world as an adult like everybody else. You know, marriage isn't probably going to be a thing, children won't be a thing. And so that, like, in that way, you know, that was my first um kind of walk through seeing how a grief journey can be sustained, you know, and also seeing how that sustained grief journey can keep someone from doing what they really want to do. Because in her case, she had, you know, promised God that she would write that book, and she wrestled with it for 13 years. And when I saw the care pages that she sent me, I thought, I bet it's because she hasn't actually fully grieved, right? Because there's still that um there's still that everything that needs to be done during the day to keep what is still beautiful about her daughter alive and thriving, and, you know, enjoying her and being busy about life and all of those things. And why, when things are so much better than they have been, would you even think about going back and looking at all of that hard stuff again? You know, who wants to go back? No one really wants to. um but there is so much value in doing that. There's so much catharsis and processing. And, you know, it's not an easy journey. We have her husband was with us at the last event in January, and we have him on video talking about how he would, you know, be working in the room next to her, and he would just hear this horrible sound, and he would go to see what had happened. It was just her releasing all of that pain and grief. It's you know, I feel like we don't really give many folks in our culture at all tools to face grief. And you
No,
know,
we're taught suck it up, buttercup, shove it down
mhm.
and keep going. We got to stay strong.
It's ridiculous. It's like the shadow of that, you know, go get an independent spirit, go make it happen, you know, you can do it. Well, yeah, but at what price are you going to do that? When these things are like the most important things, you know, the relationships and the tender memories. So yeah, I think you know, a good mixture of being able to write through it, having community around you, whether that's friends or a specific grief community or a writing community, if that's what, you know, something like ours. It really gives people the opportunity to just let them see that it's okay. You know, it's okay. It's everything that they're feeling is not just okay, it's warranted. Like, they deserve that time to be able to, you know, feel all of their feelings about something, even if there is still, you know, beautiful outcomes as a result of a tragedy. So,
I think it's like you said, that particular client, she told me, she said she's learned to accept and sit with the grief
mhm,
and not shove it down or ignore it.
yeah,
And that's a huge thing. Because I mean, I'm still working through mine, working through it.
mhm.
I
Yeah, for
deal with
sure.
grief on a regular basis. I deal with loss on a regular basis, whether it's my job or, like you said, well, like we've talked about with our kids,
Yeah.
empty nester.
Mhm.
I'm having to find my whole identity again.
Yeah.
which,
Same.
yeah, which is oh, I'm not just their mom anymore.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I'm finding out who I am again.
Yeah,
And
it was a
it's,
crazy journey that you know, and you know, I felt like when he was little, I knew a whole bunch of things. I knew that I was gonna raise him for somebody else. Like I was really clear about that because I was present to it in my own life. I had him right after I got married, and so that was part of the, like giving him his agency, like helping him to hold on to it and not claiming it as mine and thinking that, he was here just for me. Like it was clear when I saw him, he was here for something big. And
I don't raise them to keep them, I raise them to let them fly.
yeah, to let him fly. And you know, but it's my favorite thing to I had the opportunity, I want to say, um less than a month after he left home. He left home on Mother's Day, first of all. I was like, buddy,
That was
it was
mean.
it was a it was a fast opportunity, and it's just the way that it happened. And I remember thinking, like, next year's Mother's Day must it better be really good. Like you got some making up to do here. Um but I just remember I had maybe 3 weeks later, he was on this job, and he'd already, exceeded everyone's expectations and just been who he is in the world. Like he's this beautiful, bright light everywhere he goes since he was little. And so it was just so fun to, like, my new name was Aaron's mom. And I was like, I love that name. Did you know that he was so, I'm like, uh-huh. Yeah, I've known since you know, it was really special. But again, it was kind of like that bittersweet thing, right? It was so beautiful to see it being shared with everyone, and also recognize, like, ooh, that season is over of me enjoying it every day after work, or because he's my business partner and has been part of my business for a while, just that constant communication and camaraderie was going to change in its expression. So, yeah.
And it's funny you talked about how I have several friends who have special needs children, whether it be everything from Down syndrome to autism to cerebral palsy. I mean, it's a huge, huge range. And I do remember my one friend who they found out during pregnancy that her son was going to be Down syndrome.
Mm,
And she went through a grieving process. And
yeah.
it's not grief because of the disease, it's grief because, like you said, her future looks different than what they thought it would look like.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's the death of a dream. It's the death of a potential, right? And I was just talking with someone else the other day about that. Like, do you think that like everyone's pain is different, or is it all kind of the same? And I think, well, I mean, I can't imagine losing a child at all, or, a dream of a healthy child, and all of those things are just, it's so hard. But imagine if someone never addresses that grief. Like, how does that end up coming out in the family later? You know, um, if you have grief, if you have questions about, like, how could a God, like, if you, all of those things, right? You keep all of that stuff stuck inside of you. How can you have a good relationship with that child? How can you make the most of that relationship, let's say? Um,
Or do the other children in the family suffer
mhm,
because they don't understand the complexity of things going on because nobody talks with them about it?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be very, very hard. But, you know, I wonder about that, like the timing of things, finding out before, getting some time to process some of it before living inside of the experience.
And that's
Interesting.
what and like I said, I've seen so many different, I think the main common denominator I find though is they feel sometimes isolated.
Mhm. Yeah, or
Which,
compartmentalized. That's
yes.
over there. I need to be a super mom and do all of these things. And that was one of the things, actually, that's some of the feedback on that client that I was sharing with you. I had the opportunity to go out and do some of her little gatherings that she did with some of her community. And two of her family members came up to me and said, they thanked me as if it was my responsibility, like I did it. But like they said, thank you for bringing her back. And I said, what do you mean? And they said that was kind of their experience of her. Like she's just this magical human being since they've known her. And she was still, doing all of the things and taking care of everybody, like just being this magnificent human in the world. But the people closest to her could feel that there was a part of her that was wasn't there, or was pushed away, or something, right? And as soon as she was able to really be with all of that, her family felt it. Like they were like, she came back. And if for no other reason, isn't that a good reason to dive in and experience some of that, and to your point, this the opportunity, to write it out and to share it, whether it's an article or a book or a blog or a letter that you write to a friend or whatever, you know um getting it out of your body through that writing process is so valuable. But think about how powerful it is, like, um that chapter that I read right before my grandma went through what she went through and I became a caregiver, um giving people the opportunity to see your story and to kind of walk in your shoes, even though it's hard and it's painful, and they, you know, probably never want to do that for themselves. But you know what? After reading a story of you doing that and coming out better on the other side, like
So
that's it's hope. It cracks open the possibility for them that even if that type of grief was never, um it would have never occurred to them that they would experience that, someone passing by suddenly or having to deal with caregiving or all of those things, that opportunity to walk through that process with someone, it builds an internal resilience in the reader, you know, like if they can do it, I can probably do it too, right? And if I go back and read that book, I might be able to remember more clearly what it was that got them through that. So, yeah, the value of storytelling and grief, it's hard to think of anything more powerful that I've experienced, storytelling verbally and in the writing.
on to come back on that, I feel like the common between anyone, no matter whether it's a parent or the loss of someone or the loss of a job, a divorce, any loss, is everybody feels alone
Hmm.
and they feel isolated.
Yeah.
And whether you hear someone talk or you read a story, like for me to talk about it, it's hard for me to talk about my feelings,
Hmm.
which is funny because again, I'm a hospice nurse and I pull them out of everybody else. I, I'm good at getting everyone else to talk about them. But to write is almost a safe place
100%.
because I can get it all out without seeing or hearing anyone's opinions.
Yep.
So I get to help without and still stick with I always try to tell myself before I start anything, even like one of these compassionate conversations, it's what someone else thinks of me is not my business.
Mm. Yeah.
So writing is one way to do it, to keep their opinions away from you,
Hmm.
but yet still help someone, even if it's just one person, get through a hard time in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It kind of gives you the ability to get the good stuff out of that isolated feeling, right? Like it's a protected time where you can kind of put it all out there because, I mean, I have yet to meet someone who has an uncomplicated grief story, like I mean, even if it was your favorite human, like my grandma, you know, it was hard. I thought some terrible, horrible things about her toward the end. I mean, I just trying to defend my son from her behavior, it was a lot to try to process. And one of the strange things, maybe this will connect as a hospice nurse, all of those kind of strange mystical things that can happen around a death, like maybe they're waiting until someone shows up and then they go, or right, all of those sorts of things.
They waited
So
for someone, or they wait for y'all to leave so they can go, or
right,
they click
depending
up
on.
and they see something. Yeah, there's so much.
So there was, you just made me remember this about my grandmother. So she was already hard of hearing. It was already hard, like in person. Over the phone, almost impossible after we left. um but it was almost like she was visiting me in my dreams the week before she passed, 2 weeks maybe. And it was like I was waking up with visuals of scenes that I knew were from her childhood because she had talked about them a little bit. But why were they coming up in my dreams? Like I wasn't even sure where she was in the process of going, Um and so after maybe 3 or 4 nights of this, I was like, okay, am I supposed to be doing something with this? It was like her spirit was trying to talk to me. And I mean, these were horrible scenes. Like she had just a terrible childhood, abusive. And I was like, if I can do something, tell me. I don't know what to do. But they would haunt me during the day. And so finally I was like, oh yeah, what do I tell people to do? Write it down. So I started writing down these scenes, and and wondering if it was going to help her. Like this your story is seen, you know. And and then she was still kind of in that final leg, really quiet, not talking to anyone anymore, still talking to me in my dreams and my sleep. And so I had written out all of these terrible scenes she showed me, but I felt like she was hanging on because it wasn't done or something. It was kind of a very, and so I thought, well, this is what I do with all of my authors, right? Because they are usually coming with a story that is like full of this amazing overcoming, and
Gotta let go.
they don't look at the hard stuff that happened before. Like, oh, I have to include that. Yes, that's how we connect to our audience. But on the flip side, some of them are coming with stories that they don't want to look at, because when they look back, all they can see is just the awful stuff, like what my grandma was showing me, like a whole lifetime of being tortured by people who should have loved her. And then, everything that she became and didn't like as a result of that. And so I sat down and I started to write it in consecutive order, like I tell everybody, like go back to the beginning and start writing this. And so I mapped out all of these scenes, and then I pulled out of it and from kind of a narrator view, and I said, what happened in between all of this? And so what I did was I remembered, she talked about the story of being chased by um her dad was chasing her with an axe across a freshly cut alfalfa field because she left the barn door open. And so
Wow.
she was in this raggedy little dress, running across, and this is the scene she keeps showing me over and over and over. And but the thing that she didn't show me in the dream, it was almost like she'd forgotten it, was what she told me when she was telling me the story, which was a neighbor saw what was happening, opened the door and let her in, and closed the door and called the police. And so it was like this horrible thing was happening, but there was these little glimmers of angels showing up, or salvation happening, some grace, right? But it was like I wondered if on her deathbed, all she could see was the hell that she lived, because that was all she was showing me. So I wrote in all of these things that I knew were also things that were trying to balance out what had happened to her, these little moments of grace. I finished it. I called my sister because I felt like it needed to be witnessed. And no, I don't think anybody else knew these stories to the degree I did because of how long I'd been with her. And so I read it, and we're both crying through it. And then we got the text that she'd gone. She had let go. And I was like, huh. So for what it's worth, perhaps it's, not even
They're
something that
helping
you
them
have
let
to
go.
do verbally, but something that you could offer in writing, to I mean, the interaction that you can have with somebody's soul and spirit when they can't verbally communicate anymore. I think that's I know as a hospice nurse you probably experience that all the time, but I don't know if caregivers do. I don't know if other people who don't play in the kind of in between realms that you guys do all of the time understand that that's like really a precious time to interact with a soul, even if they um their physical being can't interact the way that you would imagine it could.
Your story gave me goosebumps. That
It
it makes sense. I mean, if they one way or another, they need to get their story told. And it's funny because over the last week, I've had several we had 2 or 3 patients that the weekend before, I was like, "I won't see them again." And they
mm,
were still here this past weekend. And it's like they're hanging on to something.
yeah.
But you depending on the family and where they're at, you can only go so deep into it because if they're not accepting to it, then you're just kind of stuck.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
such a powerful thing to be there. And that's what I tell people. I was like, you don't understand the blessings and the lessons that I get from my families.
Hmm.
And a big one is, don't regret life. Don't let your grief and loss of something ruin your life or make you not live anymore.
Hmm.
You've got to let things go.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
amazing. And if you're there when they do go, the only way I can ever explain it to someone is it's such a serene feeling that just comes over the room.
Hmm.
Or even if you're not there, but like you just know before you get that message.
Hmm.
And it's just a calm, serene, just such a beautiful, just that last breath, just let it go. And it's so beautiful. Um, I will take this moment that anyone here, if they have any questions, comments, any of the above, even questions for Amanda on what she does and how to get a hold of her. I'll go with no. But if you want, yeah, how would they get a hold of you?
The best way is to go to savedbystory.house. There's a contact page, but also if you hit / foreshadows, FORE shadows, there's some um free content there that you can kind of take a peek at and start to see kind of how we work, helping people get clarity around if they want to write books or publish. But there's also a a few things in there that are for what I call story saving, which is what we're talking about here, kind of being able to realize that you've been stuck in some sort of story loop that you can't get out, whether it's grief or anger or a relationship or a financial problem, and really giving people the opportunity to sit with it and ask the right questions to start shifting it and turning it into a better story.
And as far as getting a hold of me, you can go to my website at overabundanceoflight.com. I have my bio. I actually, most of these talks that I have, I try to post on there, because I want anyone who can get something from this. And I always learn something, like you telling your story of getting your grandma's story out.
Mhm.
I've not heard of, I've had all the other things happen being a hospice nurse, but I hadn't heard of that one yet. And that touched my heart. But there's a button to push to make a connection with me, set up a connection, and we can talk. I thank you so much, Amanda, for telling your story and letting us in. Is there anything else you would like to leave us with?
I think just the importance of being with other people through this process, that precious, like you're talking about, the feeling so isolated. We don't know that other people can connect with us until we start to tell our stories. So, start figuring out a way to tell your story.
Thank you, everyone who came. I will stop our recording now.